I wanted to watch this debate that Kyle Kulinski and Krystal had with Dean Phillips. Again, Dean Phillips said this earlier, but Dean Phillips is running for president. You know, there's a few people running for president on the Democrat ticket against Joe Biden in the primary. None of them have a chance at all. Like Dean Phillips and Marianne don't have a chance. Marianne's the other option. Neither of these guys have a chance of winning. Let me just be clear with you. But I do think there could at least be something productive from at least having a conversation about policy, maybe trying to drag a candidate to the left. I can understand it from that perspective, but I don't think Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, or Cenk Uygur, who we don't even know can be president because he wasn't born in the United States, I don't think any of these people got a chance. But the thing that's interesting about Dean Phillips versus Marianne Williamson and Cenk Uygur and Marianne Williamson play to a different, way more progressive, younger base, or burnt out hippie base, right? And I say that lovingly, by the way. Right, like if I was to vote for a primary candidate out of the ones assembled, and I wasn't, we're just voting for these three, I'd probably end up voting for Marianne Williamson because I agree with her more on economic policy issues, and I'd want her to bring the country a little bit more leftward. And from everything I've heard, she would not force Ukraine to negotiate. So I haven't heard her talk too much about Ukraine. So maybe if she said a few things that would get under my skin a little bit. But Dean Phillips is different. Dean Phillips is a moderate Democrat. Dean Phillips's base, or the base he would try to pull from while running for president, is Joe Biden's base. So the Dean Phillips opinion on things, if you're a Dean Phillips voter, it's probably that I'm fine with Joe Biden on everything. I just think he's too old, so I'm picking Dean Phillips. That seems to be the angle, which I don't think that enough is an inspiring campaign message to get people on board. And so him, Marianne, and Cenk have had problems. Not only structural problems, because the DNC isn't taking any of them seriously since they already have Joe Biden as president and they're almost certainly going to run with him again. But also their campaigns have had trouble getting really any mainstream attention because they don't really have a chance at all. But what's interesting about this interaction is Kyle Kulinski and Dean Phillips, since they're from two factions within the Democratic Party, Kyle Kulinski doesn't like Joe Biden as a candidate in 2024. He really thinks there's a good chance he could lose. So he wants another opinion. He wants another take. So they bring on someone like Dean. But Dean is basically just Joe Biden without certain experiences that Joe Biden has had. But on policy, when it comes to where he is like aligned politically, he's not that far off. And so the only real difference between this guy and Joe when it comes to going back and forth with Kyle, probably from a policy standpoint, is going to be his age. So while they might agree that Joe Biden would not be the best candidate and somebody should be the candidate, everything else they're going to disagree about. So I really did think it was a matter of time seeing Dean Phillips go on some of these progressive shows before a confrontation like this happened. So I didn't know it would be Kyle and Krystal first, but I guess they were the first ones to do it. Let's watch. We're going to talk about Israel and Palestine.
How would you handle Israel different from Biden?
Well, first, let me go backwards first, because I think it's important. You know, this cycle of violence has been occurring literally since I was born. And when I was born, Joe Biden was essentially a U.S. senator. I was 3 years old when he went to Washington. You know, the cycle of violence has been ongoing. The United States, we came close under the Clinton administration, of course, and Jimmy Carter, of course, made peace, with Jordan and also Egypt. But since then, for the most part,
Okay, sorry, I was muted. Let me tell you exactly why he's answering it backward. He's answering it backward because he wants to show that he's knowledgeable on foreign policy. If he's trying to run against Joe Biden, somebody who, was on the foreign Senate committees, foreign Senate committee, I'm forgetting the name of it, but was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, somebody who was vice president of the United States, has now been president of the United States, has a ton of foreign policy experience, probably wants to differentiate himself from Biden, show that he's experienced as well. But also, when asked the question, what would he do differently than Biden? The answer is probably not that much. And so that's probably another motivation as to why he's answering backwards. Because again, when it comes to supporting Israel, both Biden and Dean Phillips support Israel vaguely similarly.
The United States has been very unsuccessful in addressing one of the most significant challenges facing the world. And I'm sick of the cycle. I am sick of the terrorism. I'm sick of the settlement policy. I believe that the Palestinian Authority is corrupt. Hamas is a terrorist organization. And Benjamin Netanyahu. All three of those leaders or organizations have got to go. This is the truth.
Now, the settlement statement might seem radical, and American politicians won't talk about it often because it does probably not help American-Israeli relations, but that is technically the official position of the Biden administration and of the American government, is that they're not in favor of the settlements. And so while that might seem radical, and it is something that he should bring up, and it is good that he's talking about it because it's not often talked about, so talking about it in and of itself might seem radical, but when it comes to the current American policy position, American government's position on settlements, it's the same thing. He's just louder about it, which our government usually isn't loud about.
I think it's time for the entire world, friends and foes, to work together to impose peace. And what I mean by imposition of peace, it is time for a Palestinian state.
Oh, also, the question should be, which settlements? Does he just mean West Bank, or does he also include Golan Heights? That'd be an interesting question.
Impose peace. And what I mean by imposition of peace, it is time for a Palestinian state. I'm a Jewish man. I have great affection for Israel and its right to exist in the Jewish people, you can imagine. But I also recognize if it is indeed the prerogative of those who care about Israel to protect it, that we need to all work towards a Palestinian state. Self-determination, safety, security, and opportunity. We need a 21st century Marshall Plan in which nations of the world come together, establish a state, ensure security for both nations, and make requisite investments in civil society and economy. If we don't try this, we are not just going to fail in the region.
I mean, like, okay, that's really nice, like a Marshall Plan and like investing in the area and like making a deal between the people. But we do need more specifics, because let me tell you something. If there's anything I've learned from, covering the war in Ukraine, is hearing people say over and over and again, oh, just, like negotiate. Oh, you should have negotiated earlier. Oh, you shouldn't have negotiated. You should have talked. Should have talked here. Should have talked there. Well, talking has been attempted many, many, many different times. But if the conditions are not there, or if the, for example, the parties involved aren't willing to come to terms, or there's nothing bringing said parties to the table, there's a million different ways it could fail. And I think one of the examples in Ukraine is the Ukrainian position and the Russian position are just so diametrically opposed. One denies Ukraine's right to exist because it's an artificial state. The other side wants Russia out of all of Ukraine for, I believe, good reason. So for that reason, negotiating isn't going to get that far right now, especially when it's still the campaign season, both in Russia, and Russia is waiting for the American campaign season to be over to see if they can garner more leverage from it. I mean, Sergei Shoigu has said openly, our strategy is to wait till 2025. Oh, why is the strategy to fight till at least 2025? Oh, there's something that happens at the end of 2024. But just saying negotiate after 200 rounds of negotiation and 20 attempts at negotiated ceasefire, it doesn't add too much to the conversation. So there has to be questions about how do you bring Israel to the table? Do you think the current government in Israel, Netanyahu, which he said he doesn't like, it would even be possible to get them to make a deal? There's specifics that I really hope Kyle and Krystal hit on.
It is a risk to the entire globe. And we're getting to a point where people will be able to carry nuclear weapons in backpacks into any city in the world.
I do want to remind people that during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, obviously, and I want to emphasize this, the conditions are different. What preluded the invasion of Gaza and what preluded the Israeli invasion of Lebanon is different. And obviously it was a different time too. But during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, the Reagan administration, yes, the Ronald Reagan administration, withdrew an agreement and suspended an agreement to send jets to Israel in protest of it, and then told the Israeli ambassador what was happening in southern Lebanon looked like the Holocaust. Now, you don't need to agree with Holocaust comparisons or whatever, but that does show that the Reagan administration was willing to leverage their military assets for what they believed was Americans' national security interest, and in order to keep America's relationship with other powers in the region beneficial. A question I would like to see Kyle ask him is, what would he be willing to leverage? Would he be willing to do what the Biden administration or other administrations were not willing to do and leverage aid? Or does he think that would not be a successful strategy and would only strain our relationship and solve nothing? Like, I want specifics, because just saying talking, that might work with, any like 30-minute magazine interview. But if you're going to have a 30-minute segment on this, I really want to get into specifics.
World. And if we don't act now and invest in peace and reduce despair and oppression all around the world, we are going to be in big trouble. And I do not see this president, and I certainly don't see President Trump, willing to present the courage of conviction to actually pursue this. And I do wish to create a Palestinian state.
Wait, no, it's not already. I'm hosting. Oh, I know this is going to happen, but I'm going to wait. I thought it was happening right now. Yeah, I know this is going to happen. Ben Shapiro and Destiny are going to debate. When it happens, we'll watch it.
I think that is the only way forward. I care just as much about Palestinian kids and families and people as I do about Israelis.
Yep. It's two-state solution. Again, it's the current position of the American government as well, current position of the Biden administration as well. And Kyle's question was, what would you do differently than Biden?
And Jewish people, because we're all.
So I just want to see, like, you could both have the same goal as Biden or same goal as Biden administration, but what would you do differently? That was a question.
Humans, and I'm sick and nauseated and appalled by what I see happening time and time again.
So Biden subverted Congress to send more weapons to Israel recently. And, you know, I have to ask you, Bernie Sanders came out the other day and basically said, no more funding. This is totally gross and disproportionate a response, and massive numbers of innocent civilians are being killed daily. And Bernie early on was one of the guys saying, I don't want a full ceasefire. But now even he's come to the position, we got to stop arming this. We see what's happening. We have eyes. We can see the video. We can see the pictures. Right. So are you in that place now as well where obviously I'm sure you agree that Biden shouldn't have subverted Congress, but are you also at the point where it's like, hey, man, not a penny more because we see what's going on?
Yeah, so as for congressional consent, yes, I do believe Congress should consent to such arms transfers. I mean, that's why we have a United States Congress. And the fact of the matter is, Congress has to reassert itself. That's a whole nother conversation I'd love to have with you at some point, having been on the inside. It's appalling how much happens without consent or only the consent of a handful, which defeats democracy. As for the circumstance itself, look, two things can be true at once. Hamas has to be eliminated. They're the enemy of not just Israelis, they're the enemy of Palestinians, and it is the truth. Palestinians want the same thing that every one of us want in the world, which is security.
For those of you curious about the deal, let me tell you what was in it. The State Department said Friday the Secretary of State Anthony Blinken had told Congress that he had made a second emergency determination covering $147.5 million sale for equipment, including fuses, charges, and primers that is needed to make 155 millimeter shells that Israel has already purchased function. Basically, they're saying we're giving them the parts for artillery shells, for guns like the M777 howitzer, which the Ukrainians are using, since they're using the same type of artillery shell.
And possibility, food on the table. You know,
oh, and yes, he did bypass Congress. Yes, he did.
Economic potential. It's not that difficult, but Hamas is not looking for peace. And Benjamin Netanyahu is not looking for peace. So two things can be true at once. Hamas has to be eliminated. On the other hand, Netanyahu and his government right now appear to have no incentive to end this war. And that's a reality. He's facing corruption charges. His standing only increases when there's times of battle. And these are truths. So I do think the United States should ensure two things: that Hamas is defeated, that Israel is protected, and that we do not support the indiscriminate killing of human beings, period. So.
Okay, so this is the thing I would say about Dean's position, right? While he supports a two-state solution, until there is a two-state solution, or there is some permanent solution to what he has called the cycle of violence, an unending occupation will inevitably lead us right back to square one with the cycle of violence. It will lead us right back to square one, unless they were to completely expel the population, which would not only be horribly horrific, but would also be illegal and ethnic cleansing. Right. And there have been some people that have suggested that who have ties to the Netanyahu administration. There have been some think tanks that have suggested things similar. But as of right now, the Netanyahu administration has not taken that position, as far as we know. So if we want to end the cycle of violence, there has to be some entity created for the Palestinians. If you support a two-state solution, what are you willing to do to stop that cycle of violence and bring that about? This is not an easy question, by the way. What I'm asking for is not, I'm asking Dean, you want to run for president. You say that, the administration has failed on this. What are you going to do better then? So it's not an easy question to ask. Obviously, Israel-Palestine issue is fucking, it's not, many people have tried to solve it. Many have failed. But if you're taking the stage running for president during this crisis, you're going to have some sort of an answer.
Yes, Congress should be playing a role, and that's why we have Congress, and you can see what's going on.
But
because as of right now, I don't know. I don't really distinguish how his position is different than Biden's.
how do you eliminate Hamas? Because this is a talking point I hear all the time, and it seems to be like a justification for the perpetual bombardment. Right now, we see the numbers according to Euromed.
If anything, from what I know about what the Biden administration has said to the Netanyahu government in private about like ending the operation and pulling out, and like when they have like gotten their goals, it might even be a position like the elimination of Hamas being the position of the American government as well. As a security priority that might actually be slightly further than the Biden administration.
Monitor, the human rights group, it's 92% innocent civilians who have been killed. How do you, quote unquote, get rid of Hamas? It seems like an impossible standard in the same way that George W. Bush waged a war on terror. It's like you're never just going to defeat terror, and there's always going to be Palestinian hardliners and militants. So,
well, the problem isn't necessarily even like defeating Hamas specifically, even though that would be an incredible task for the Israeli government to defeat Hamas. Like they go out around the world, they'll have to assassinate people overseas like they're doing in southern Lebanon. They'll have to find these people in Qatar. They'll have to carry out this operation to like its bitter end. That would probably mean an extended period of stay in Gaza if they wanted to root out the people who are, people just changing to civilian clothes and like, hi, I was a Hamas fighter and nope, now I'm in civilian clothes and I'm walking amongst the population. And so if you wanted to really make sure they were gone out of Gaza, that could mean a long-term Israeli occupation. How long? Who knows? But like that in and of itself is going to be a difficult task. But if the same conditions that created Hamas still exist, then what would stop some other group like Palestinian Islamic Jihad from filling the vacuum? For example, we really did bust up Al-Qaeda as the United States after 9/11. Now, Al-Qaeda as an organization is not what it used to be. It doesn't have the same money, doesn't have the same international control, but other groups splintered off of it and they created their own offshoots and they filled power vacuums themselves. Now, you can try to deal with that by trying to stabilize the region or working with local partners, as we did with the SDF, to do Operation Inherent Resolve. But if you don't create the conditions for peace, then we're just going to be talking about maybe it'll be Palestinian Islamic Jihad next time. Maybe Bad Bunny will come to the Gaza Strip and it'll be the PFLP and she'll lead a revolution. Who knows what it'll do? Point is, though, other groups will fill the vacuum if you don't create the conditions. And so that's where the question needs to be focused. Creating the conditions. Like, okay, you eliminate Hamas, then what? Because this current government doesn't seem that interested in creating the conditions for an independent Palestinian entity.
How do you defeat?
Like the closest we will get as of right now is the continuation of the PA, and maybe there will be an extension of that authority into the Gaza Strip. Who knows? Fatah is not doing well right now. I saw the recent polling numbers. They are even less popular than when they were before the war, which was not popular.
Defeat Hamas. It seems like an impossible standard.
Well, you have to target. By the way, the United States we have an AUMF authorization for the use of military force against Al Qaeda and ISIS right now. I think Hamas should be added to that because they are a terrorist organization currently holding 8 Americans hostage.
Okay, so to be clear, that sounds like he wants to get directly involved. If he wants to use the AUMF, so for those of you who don't know, the AUMF is the authorization for use of military force. It is the legal document which has been stretched quite a bit, depending on who you talk to justify American military action throughout the Middle East. The reason why Trump didn't have to tell Congress before killing Soleimani, according to him, was because that was covered by the AUMF, meant to fight terrorism in the region. Now, many people in Congress disagreed with it because they were like, I don't think this document, which was used to approve military operations after 9/11 to go after Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda affiliates, were necessarily ever signed with the intention or made with the intention to be used to assassinate foreign military leaders like Qasem Soleimani. And so he wants to use that same AUMF, which has already been stretched quite a lot, to go after Hamas, which would sound like American airstrikes on Hamas. So would we get our own Air Force involved? So we get more deeply involved with military operations in the Gaza Strip? Or do we participate with them in assassinations throughout the region of Hamas leaders, like in southern Lebanon?
Start with that for one moment. 8 Americans have been held hostage for almost 3 months in Gaza. It should be first and foremost priority of the United States president and our entire country to ensure their release or extract them if necessary. So I want to remind you that Hamas is holding Americans hostage, and we should not accept that. Yes, is it hard to eliminate them? Absolutely. But if the world unites behind the elimination of terror, there are a lot of ways to do so, and I'm afraid that we are.
Now, he said that they need to do targeting. Was the start of his answer when Kyle talked about the civilian casualties, and that seemed to be the only response to that. The Israelis are doing some sort of targeting. I mean, they're aiming into the Gaza Strip. The question is, how do they make the decision to fire what is, according to them, acceptable collateral damage and what is not acceptable collateral damage? The AI system that they use in order to engage in targeting that has made it so instead of having like a few dozens of targets to go after, you have hundreds of targets to go after. How does that AI system make its decision making? That's classified information. I don't know that. Can the American government find that out? What about how much does the people who are using that AI system to make determination to fire, how much do they understand of that AI system? We formalized our weapons transfer process in just like a year ago. No, now 2 years ago in 2022. We formalized that transfer process in order to make it so we know when U.S. partners, if they commit a war crime, if they use our weapons to do some horrific stuff, we can review that and then retract those weapons deals, retract those weapon shipments, retract that aid. That review has not been done with Israel. Would Dean Phillips commit to that type of thing to ensure that proper targeting is going on? This is why I think it was Josh Paul resigned from the State Department when he was working with acquisitions, was because he didn't believe it was getting the proper review.
We can be very effective.
Was it Josh Paul? Josh Paul, State Department. Yes, it is Josh Paul.
We work together. We're not very effective when we do it alone. It has to be an all hands on deck approach. But at the end of the day, the real way to eliminate Hamas is to ensure that Palestinians have a future. And in the absence of a
like his answer to how do we like stop the civilian casualties was aim. It's just not a in-depth answer. I mean, he's not wrong. If you want to lessen civilian casualties, you do need to aim. But that's not very detailed.
A principled government representing Palestinians who are seeking.
It's like you're interviewing the police chief. How are you going to rebuild relationships with the black community after this shooting? Well, we're gonna stop shooting so many unarmed black people. Oh, okay. Well, that is a solution. That is a one of the solutions, I guess. But you didn't really tell us how you're going to do that.
Seeking peace, who are seeking prosperity, and who are seeking protection, we are going to see militant organizations rise in every country in the world if people are oppressed. So this is a chicken and the egg. I understand that. But I believe that the investment in people and infrastructure, when people have something to protect, they act in defensive manners. When people have nothing to lose, when hopelessness reigns,
people are going to complain no matter how low the civilian casualties are. Yeah, but when we see stuff like, for example, that Greek Orthodox church that got blown up, where that cousin of Congressman Justin Amash got killed and all those other people, where even the Israelis admit to it, like that type of stuff, that shouldn't have happened. That shouldn't have happened. And there needs to be questions, and they need to justify these targeting decisions. But we don't know how they're justifying these targeting decisions because it's all private information. And that's why I want the government, which is their job, since obviously if Israel was to tell, okay, everyone, this is all the decision-making process we make for every single time we take a shot, then that could be used by Israel's enemies in order to try to avoid that. I understand that. So that's where the government comes in, and someone who's supposed to be Israel's ally, the United States, and would go through that targeting process to make sure that, that our weapons are not being used to indiscriminately kill civilians. That's not even talking about what the invasion of the Gaza Strip is going to lead to long term with the Netanyahu government. That's just talking about the targeting decisions of warfare, period. This should be the general standard for all weapons deals everywhere, period.
It doesn't matter if it's Gary, Indiana, or the Gaza Strip. It is the same human beings and the same human condition. People will not live under oppression, and I understand that. And I'm a Jewish man who loves Israel. These are truths. And I'm trying to tell everybody who's watching and listening right now that we got to rise above the conflict and invest in humanity. And the way to eliminate Hamas is to show there's a better way. But right now, most Palestinians.
Sorry, we have to invest in humanity. It just feels so I feel like I just watched like a piece of like bread just fall over. Like, amazing point. We need to invest in humanity.
Don't see a better way because it is absent. That's why I think it's time to impose the possibility of peace, but that is going to take an all hands on deck international effort, including China, by the way, which I think could be an extraordinary opportunity to reset our relationship with China, to start investing as partners in peace all around the world, end the war in Ukraine, have a Palestinian state created with security in the Middle East. The Gulf states and MBS have to be participating.
Okay, so Palestinian state, how do we get there? How do we get there? How do we go from Netanyahu occupied Gaza Strip, which seems to be the pathway we're on there, to two-state solution, considering what government's in power in Israel, and who knows what government will replace it when elections happen. If elections happen anytime soon, Israel has a tendency to kind of do that thing.
Participants, I believe it's time to change our entire approach because it is not working, the status quo. It's simply not working. And I just want to say one more thing about Israel because I think it's important that people know this. You know, when the first boats of refugees left Europe,
okay, status quo isn't, okay, to be clear, status quo isn't working. So his solution was use the AUMF to go after Hamas, and then two-state solution, undefined how. How? I mean, the only thing that's different than the status quo that he's proposing is, I think, the use of the AUMF to go after Hamas. We do have Hamas designated as a terrorist organization, but we haven't like engaged our aircraft or stuff to go after them like that. Is that what he thinks the solution is to the status quo? Is more direct American military involvement, or what's the difference?
United States, they were turned away. Right? They were turned away. There are now 200 or so Christian majority nations in the world, about 140 Muslim majority nations in the world. And there's just one Jewish majority nation in the world, established after 6 million Jewish people were killed just for their religion. And Israel needs to exist. And progressives in America supported Israel for generations under that belief that there needs to be a singular, at least, Jewish majority state as a place of refuge for the Jewish diaspora, because there will be another Holocaust, sadly, or another pogrom. We're seeing evidence of that anti-Semitism rise again. So I would just ask people to have hearts open for Palestinians who have suffered, and also the Jewish people who have suffered through thousands of years of horrifying history. There's a lot of oppression in the world. We have a lot of it here in America. But I just want to be mindful of the realities, and let's work on the solutions rather than the condemnations. And that means it's time for new leadership, like I said, in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in the West Wing, period.
Congressman, do you believe that Israel has committed war crimes, and would you be committed to holding the perpetrators of those war crimes accountable were you president?
I believe any perpetrator of a war crime, if demonstrated in a court, international court.
I mean, we know Israeli soldiers have committed war crimes. Okay, let's just get mild about it. Let's not even get to like the most intense stuff. We had this showed up for later. A lot of like the war crimes that are committed are like, a lot of those stuff has already been talked about when we talk about, for example, like the targeting of civilians in the West Bank, or I just want to highlight like a smaller example. It was highlighted by Ryan Macbeth. This was an example that he found, that he actually even said that he thought he was going to use as an example on how to teach soldiers not to behave. I just, I don't want to show anybody getting shot on screen as a war crime, or like something that is still being debated as a war crime. So I'm just going to show this because this is not TOS enough to show on stream. But this is an example of an Israeli soldier like in a shop, like smashing up Palestinian goods. Look at this.
Soldier in a Palestinian shop popped up online. First, I'm going to show you the video, and then I'm going to explain why this kind of behavior is wrong. Let's watch the video.
תכין לי עוד ערכה, הפעם ב5,000. אם לא נשכח תמיד להיות מאוחדים. ונורא מנגינה, 250 שקלים. אוקיי, חדש בקופסה, אצלי רק סטופי. פה מזכרת לילד, 740. הכל סטופ.
So what he's doing is he's yelling the like prices of the items and then smashing them.
2 بمدينة 250 سنة.
You know what really sucks about this, and Ryan Macbeth said the same thing, but is that when you're like, when that person eventually goes back to his shop when all this is over, assuming he's still alive, hopefully he's still alive, and he has to rebuild whatever little he has, he's gonna look around and see basically everything in his shop destroyed. And when he could have gotten enough goods, maybe $50 worth of goods, $60 worth of goods, hell, maybe even $20 worth of goods. But when you're talking about an area like Gaza that is as dirt poor as it is when it comes to the civilian population and not the political elite who gouge and steal off the working people in Gaza. But for that person, it's going to be incredibly difficult to go back and try to rebuild, and you're just making it more difficult for them to rebuild. So when people talk about like a state committing war crimes, we know that Israeli soldiers have committed war crimes. Now, when you talk about this general ordering this soldier to go out and specifically knowingly kill this building full of civilians for the purpose of killing civilians, we don't have any internal communication documents or stuff like that. But we do have examples of either this example. I think Ryan Macbeth said he's probably a conscript soldier, a reservist, which maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. Point is, he's in Israeli uniform, he's in the Gaza Strip, and he committed war crimes. We know that's happened. This is the only example I just want to show on screen. The question should be, what is the American president, Dean Phillips, going to do to try to make sure that our allies conduct themselves in a way that is becoming of an American ally that we're supplying with weapons? Completely, again, this is just a general standard we should have everywhere, separate from if we have, if the invasion of Gaza or the continuation of this campaign is even a good idea in the first place.
Of course, doesn't matter one's religion, doesn't matter one's nationality, doesn't matter one's political party or one's perspective. I mean, and this goes back to the 14th Amendment. I understand, the law is the law. I also understand there are dangers if the law is not applied consistently and literally religiously. And as it relates to war crimes, I'm afraid our world tolerates way too much destruction and invests way too little in peace. But the answer is, of course. I'd be a hypocrite.
Do you see evidence of that with regards to Israel, though? I mean, we have Washington Post confirming white phosphorus dropped on civilians in a manner inconsistent with international law in Lebanon. We have the complete siege.
We had that recent case of, and originally there was rumors that the journalist that blown up recently, of the Al Jazeera journalist. Oh God, this story is so sad. I'll just go to it quickly because it does deserve attention, and I don't know if I've covered it on stream, but that journalist at Al Jazeera, the bureau chief, Wali, sorry, I'm bad at pronouncing his name. His children were killed in October. His grandchild and his 15-year-old son, his 7-year-old daughter, and his wife. And a few days ago, his other son and his journalistic colleague were killed in another strike as they were covering Israeli bombardment of the Gaza Strip. Originally, there was this rumor going around that he was with a Hamas drone team, and I saw certain spokespeople start pumping that out. But then later, that was proven not to be the case, and they were just going around covering the war, and their car was bombed and killed. This would be the type of stuff that I would point to, where there has to be deep investigations into and see who made the decisions to make these strikes, whether they had any idea that civilians would be killed, the proportion of civilians would be killed. And from there, that's when you talk about arresting people and putting them away and locking them away. Sadly, though, I don't know if the Israeli government is going to be I'm just going to be light here. I'm going to be polite. If they're going to be that eager to catch all the people engaging in indiscriminate bombing or not taking civilian casualties into decision making.
Which was announced at the beginning of Israel's assault on Gaza. We have what the president himself has described as indiscriminate bombing, a level of civilian death, somewhere around 80% of those killed. We have hospitals, schools, civilian infrastructure, agricultural lands, all targeted. Do those acts, in your opinion, constitute war crimes?
Well, first of all, war crimes are war crimes. Of course, any targeting of innocents or any failure to protect them, of course. But Krystal, October 7th.
I would also point to the 3 Israeli hostages that were shot while trying to surrender with white flags. It's another example of crime.
Look, Hamas has to be held. Let's start with Hamas for a second. October 7th. By the way, there can be a long discussion about the roots of this conflict, and I do believe the Netanyahu settlement policy, of course, it's horrifyingly provocative. I've told that to his face, by the way. But as it relates to what you just asked me, Hamas needs to be held accountable. Talk about indiscriminate. But let me just finish. You asked the question. Let's start with Hamas. What they did to women, the rapes, the videos. I don't know if you've seen that are most horrifying videos of the direct targeting of innocent civilians I've ever seen. It's repulsive.
I mean, it is horrifically gross. You go into Israel, you kill tons of civilians, then you go back into Gaza, then you do hide amongst, in many instances, the civilian population, whether people want to accept that reality or not. There's been multiple UN reports talking about their use of UN schools to store weapons. Like, people can deny that Hamas does that. Hamas does do that. It's an extremely dense urban environment. Any air campaign is going to have high civilian casualties. An enraged Israel that's willing to look the other way, even more so. But I mean, they run back into the urban environment and then fight from there, because they know if they put all their fighters out in the field and fought them one-on-one, they'd all get like obliterated in an afternoon.
Okay, that is a horrifying crime against humanity. If Netanyahu is demonstrated in a court of law that Netanyahu knowingly targeted civilians or took no steps to prevent civilian loss of life, of course.
But here's, I don't want to nitpick, but here's my issue with what you just said. The language you use with regard to Hamas is appropriately unequivocal. You talk about the crimes that they committed, the horrors that they committed. You don't say if they did, if it's proven in a court of law. But suddenly when it comes to Israel, it's, well, sure, if they did it. But you're not committing to what we see in the horrors post-October 7th. I mean, the videos are available for everyone to see. We know the civilian death toll.
12,000 children as of right now.
I am 100,000,000% on board with Hamas being held accountable for the atrocities that they committed. But there seems to be such a reluctance to have the same moral clarity when it comes to the Israeli government, which at this point has a higher civilian death rate than even the terrorists of Hamas.
Look, I hear you, and I think we're saying the same thing. When you target innocent human beings, you should be held accountable. I think we have different perspectives, perhaps because, look, I'm a Jewish person whose people have been subject to some of the most horrific abuses of humanity in history. And I'm not asking you to understand how I feel because you can't walk in my shoes. I've not walked in yours, and I certainly haven't walked in the shoes of Palestinians. But I can speak for the Jewish people who are simply trying to defend themselves. And I understand, the difference is I've seen the video of individual Hamas fighters, brutally targeting and attacking individuals in Israel. What I'm getting at here is we don't have yes, have I seen the evidence of killing? Yes, it's atrocious. I'm appalled. I'm a proud Jewish man who supports Israel, who's appalled by the loss of lives of Palestinians. I want to end it today. I want to end this nonsense and establish a state. But like I said, I don't know what went on in the rooms. I don't know specifically who targeted and who made the approvals to drop bombs in certain places. I'm not saying that I disagree if the fact is the evidence indicates the same. I just haven't seen video of it like I have with Hamas fighters.
Really? You haven't seen video of it? It's all over the place. Watch my show.
Guys, I've seen the video of the loss of life. I'm talking about the perpetrators, you guys. This is different. The perpetrators. Okay? I'm making it really clear. I'm making it really clear. I'm no fan of Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he's a big part of this problem. I'm simply pointing out also, because look at, this is part of the problem. I don't understand why there isn't also a conversation about the security of Israel, period, because it's been attacked for its entire life.
I think that's the only conversation people are having, certainly in U.S. media and among U.S. politicians.
But to your point, though, Congressman, the ultimate enemy of Hamas and the ultimate enemy of extremists in Israel is peace. It's peace. There is no military solution to this conflict.
No,
the ultimate guarantee of security for Palestinians and Israelis alike is peace. And so there seems to be, you acknowledge that, but then there's other language about, well, Israel's just trying to defend itself, and why isn't there a conversation about Israeli security? Well, actually, that is the conversation that we're trying to have.
Well, here's the difficult question. If what Krystal is saying is true, and the enemy of both Netanyahu and Hamas is peace, then what would be the motivation for Hamas to engage in peace if Israel was to stop all fighting and then pull out tomorrow? That would be the question. So I would say that maybe trying to make other parties, other representations, even like Fatah, no matter their corruption, more palatable by being willing to make concessions to them might be one way to counter that. But if it's just, you know, Israel goes back to Israel, Hamas goes back to Gaza, and then nothing changes, then we're just going to be here and like, we're going to be here again in 5 years. Just like if Israel was to bomb Gaza to smithereens, occupy, and then leave in 5 years, then we'll just be here again in 10 years. If there's no fundamental change to the relationship between the occupation authority, the PA, Israel, and a future Palestinian state. And that's going to require the American government making the Israeli government, whether it was Netanyahu's government or future government that would be actually willing to make a deal, make concessions and try to get something close to the Clinton parameters.
Have is about
the Clinton parameters, by the way, was a last-ditch effort by President Bill Clinton to offer a deal to the Palestinian negotiators during the end of the Oslo Accords after negotiations fell through.
Israeli,
and it was also the best deal that has ever been proposed under the, you know, the current framework.
Security and Palestinian security, you know, specifically on, you know, that you haven't seen the.
By the way, somebody could say, Dylan, why would you go to a failed model in order to try to succeed? Doesn't that not work with the Minsk Accords? I would also put forward, though, that the main difference to me when it comes to the Clinton parameters and the Minsk Accord is in the Clinton parameters that were offered, there were certain security guarantees to Israel, for example, like control of Palestinian airspace, that would not exist in the Minsk Accords to reassure the Russians in a way or make the Russians feel like they wouldn't be willing to, they wouldn't want to go in, wouldn't have a desire to go in and conquer, etc. Whereas a future Israeli government that isn't Netanyahu's administration, who I do think doesn't have an interest in peace, might be willing to make that deal.
Evidence with regard to Israel that you've seen with regard to Hamas. You know, the government, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, at the beginning of this, he announced complete siege, blocking food, water, medicine, fuel, and said, quote, "We are fighting human animals and they need to be treated as such." You have the UN reporting that half of Gazans are starving. 90% of the population.
Disagree, but it's work right now. Again, in my mind, it's the closest we've ever gotten to success. And so if we're trying to make a future deal, you should look towards what has been closest to success.
Entire population routinely goes entire days without eating. Okay, this isn't me, this is the UN, this is what the government announced. Is that complete siege and denial of the basic conditions of life, is that a war crime?
I'm so just
sorry, I didn't even hear it because I was thinking about a possibility of making a deal. So let me hear a question again.
Enemy
U.S. politicians.
But to your point, though, Congressman, the ultimate enemy of Hamas and the ultimate enemy of extremists in Israel is peace. It's peace. There is no military solution to this conflict.
No,
the ultimate guarantee of security for Palestinians and Israelis alike is peace. And so there seems to be, you acknowledge that, but then there's other language about, well, Israel's just trying to defend itself, and why isn't there a conversation about Israeli security? Well, actually, that is the conversation that we're trying to have, is about both Israeli security and Palestinian security. You know, specifically on, you know, that you haven't seen the evidence with regard to Israel that you've seen with regard to Hamas. You know, the government, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, at the beginning of this, he announced complete siege, blocking food, water, medicine, fuel, and said, quote, "We are fighting human animals and they need to be treated as such." You have the UN reporting that half of Gazans are starving. 90% of the population, entire population, routinely goes entire days without eating. Okay, this isn't me, this is the UN, this is what the government announced. Is that complete siege and denial of the basic conditions of life, is that a war crime?
I'm so just listening to what you just shared, Krystal, it makes my heart break, and it's sickening, and it's wrong, and I don't want to see humans suffering. I'm trying to make this really, really clear. I'm sick of it, and I do believe people who are responsible for war crimes should be prosecuted. Period.
But are
Krystal should make the question more pointed. She should go under like a specific categorization of war crime, because I feel like a lot of times people just use the word war crime to mean bad, you know, and I find that annoying because things can be bad and technically legal under international law. Legality does not dictate morality. She should make her question more pointed, since he is a congressman and he's talking about the war, and say, does this cover the war? Why is this not something like collective punishment? That should be a question. If you are not willing to dictate it as a war crime, why would it not fall under something like collective punishment, which is the main argumentation for why it'd be counted as a war crime?
Are they responsible for war crimes?
And the fact of the matter is, you know, look, all I'm trying to get to with both of you right now is two things can be true at once. You know,
sorry, I just saw this great the great comment from Gutter Chat. But laws are just words, man. You're so true, man. I never thought I never thought about that before. Man, you're right. Man, like, laws are just words and stuff, man.
Executed, period.
But are they responsible for war crimes?
And the fact of the matter is, you know, look, all I'm trying to get to with both of you right now is two things can be true at once. You know, Hamas is a horrific terrorist organization that is committed to the destruction of the Jewish people, and I'm not going to continue to tolerate people who will not simply acknowledge that. That is true. And
that's the easiest acknowledgement in the world, though. I think the question for you is Netanyahu a terrorist? Is Netanyahu?
No, why are you moving on? Kyle, no. You were getting the. They should stay. The thing is, they're jumping, and maybe it's because they only have 30 minutes, right? But they could have dug down on this. Talk about collective punishment. Talk about that thing that Krystal made was compelling. It was emotionally compelling. Dean agreed that it was bad, so you had something to work towards. Like, hey, if you agree that it's bad, well, is it a war crime? And then you debate about that, and then you can move from that to, well, whether or not it's a war crime. Do you think that the aid needs to be allowed in from the Egyptian border? Do you believe that aid needs to be maybe allowed in from the Israeli border? But no, we're just moving on. I understand there is time constraints on these things. He's running for president. Getting 30 minutes with a presidential candidate for a one-on-one interview is really, really good. I'd love to interview Dean Phillips and ask him this question instead, if they're not willing to, or if they don't have the time to drill it down. Because I'd rather just go through 3 questions or 4 questions really solidly than go through like 10 or 20 but very surface level.
A terrorist.
I've sat with Benjamin Netanyahu twice this year. I've made it very clear how I feel. He is responsible for the lack of security, and I believe for a lot of the mess in which this entire region now finds itself in right now. His settlement policy, his right-wing government. I'm not going to call him, guys, you're going to push me in directions. Is he a terrorist? No, I don't think he's a terrorist. I think he is a misguided, ineffective, and increasingly dangerous leader for Israel, because I think Israel.
This is the thing that gets me. A better question would be, is he a war criminal, right? Because the problem with the word terrorist is people have different interpretations in their head when they hear terrorist. When someone hears terrorist, the image they get in their head, somebody with a bomb vest on, with an RPG, and you can talk about like the morality of that, of the idea, and there are legal scholars that believe that terrorists have to specifically be non-governmental actors, right? That doesn't mean you believe that straining the Gaza population from food, water, and fuel is a good idea or is a good thing, and that's not horrible or doesn't inspire terror. But there are certain legal scholars that do believe that in order to be a terrorist, it has to be non-governmental. So I think a better question to ask, people could call this semantics, and to a degree, it is. I think a better question to ask would be, is he a war criminal?
Security is at risk because of Ben.
Or like, do you believe that he like whatever? You get the idea. I don't want to stay on this for too long. I don't want to stick on semantics for too long. But it isn't semantics because these words do matter. But it is kind of.
Benjamin Netanyahu. Not everybody look, we can go into this for a long, long time. And all I'm saying is I think two things are true. I think you're saying only one thing's true. And I'm just being honest.
Well,
Wait,
you're not listening. Here, listen, ready? I'll say it very clearly. Hamas is a terrorist organization. The leaders of Hamas should be brought to the International Criminal Court, found guilty, and put in prison forever. I also believe that of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and Netanyahu. Do you?
I think those three men you just referenced are a big part of the problem, and I think should also, if there's, I do believe if there's evidence suggesting the same thing that you just shared about them, absolutely. Because what
that's probably more. That's as good as you're gonna get. That answer right there is as good as you're gonna get from a Democrat like Dean Phillips.
Seeing in the destruction of human beings is repulsive. Period. I also just want to make it clear: there should be two nations that live side by side with peace and prosperity, and I hope there are Jews living in a Palestinian state, just like Palestinians are living in a Jewish state, that both people are treated with respect and decency and integrity and equity, period. And I hear you. I'm saying the same thing.
I want to go back to Kyle's original question.
But I mean, that'd be interesting though. If you're the American president, I mean, from a morality standpoint, I understand where Kyle's getting at. But if you're running for president and your declared position is that the president and his cabinet should be in prison for his crimes, I don't know how you get that person to a negotiating table. Then again, here's the other question: would they want to come to the negotiating table to negotiate the future of a Palestinian state whatsoever anyway? No. And so, you know what? I think I'd lean towards rough them up, go out there, throw out a few bombastic statements about the Netanyahu government. The people don't like their government anyway. I feel like they have to go out the door in the next 3 years anyway.
Which is, Biden has offered Israel no red lines, unconditional support, bypassed normal procedures both within the State Department and circumvented Congress to ship weapons as rapidly as he possibly can. Yes, occasionally we get some pearl clutching about we're worried about what's going on, but the actions have been consistently supportive of whatever Israel wants to do. Would you be different from that? What are the decision points? How would you have handled this conflict from the beginning?
I believe Israel's at its best when it eliminates individuals in the targeted approaches. By the way, as you both probably know, after the Holocaust, Israel did not rest for literally 50 years pursuing every single Nazi around the world they could identify, one at a time, and bringing justice to them. I do believe that's the best approach with Hamas. As we've seen already in the last couple of days, there's been some evidence of them doing just that. The indiscriminate loss of human life is appalling. I don't care your religion, your perspective, your politics. It's appalling and wrong. And I would absolutely have done a lot more to limit that, or at least draw red lines. By the way, we've drawn red lines in the past in Syria, of course, when Joe Biden was, vice president, walked right over those, let Putin walk right into Crimea. And we're not really good with the red line approach, sadly, but yes, the answer is yes. Yes, we have to, by the way, do that all over the world. And that's part of my proposition for investing in peace and preventing this nonsense. And I
remember Obama was so bad when it comes to talking about Ukraine. I remember when somebody asked him, if the Russians invade Ukraine, what will America do? And he said, this will make dialogue between us and Russia very difficult. It's like, what the fuck? Oh my God. Yeah. Red line on Crimea. I would not describe it.
Been a lot more.
I mean, at least that's not how the Obama administration treated it.
Aggressive with Israel relative to the settlement policy for years. Who in their right mind would not have predicted at some point this would happen? So the answer to your question on that is absolutely.
South Africa has initiated proceedings against Israel, accusing them of genocide at the International Court of Justice. First of all, do you find those claims to have merit? And second of all, if you were president and ICJ found Israel guilty of genocide, would you support that finding?
Well, Krystal, genocide, I'm going to return to genocide is what Hitler did to the Jewish people. Specifically, very clearly targeted the elimination of an entire people. That's genocide. Hamas is committed to the destruction of the Jewish people in Israel, shoving people into the sea. That is, to me, the roots of genocide. But do I have great faith in the international courts right now on any of these circumstances? I do not. But it does not change my perspective that, like I just said, anybody who comes...
Well, we should join the International Criminal Court, by the way. That would be my first answer would be join the International Criminal Court, because then it would be easier to support or negotiate or be a part of discussions and talks with the International Criminal Court. Not just being engaged in talks, but then we can be, I think, we can hold ourselves to the standards we hold others to, like the Russians, when we were giving evidence against them to the International Criminal Court. But yeah, I think we should respect the ruling. However, the International Criminal Court rules, I think we should.
Commits crimes against humanity should...
Of course, you look at the evidence. You don't just blindly say, all hail the International Criminal Court. Institutions can be wrong, but you should also have trusted institutions. You should also have trusted institutions. And if we're going to hold everybody to the same standard, we need institutions like the International Criminal Court.
Should be prosecuted and held accountable, period. And
so do you find that their claims have...
You're talking about the ICJ, not the... Oh, the International Court of Justice. Okay, got you. Same point, though. You still should... All my points about the institution still stand. Different about joining it. We should join the International Criminal Court, though.
Merit. They put in something like an 84-page report that details conditions on the ground, including, as I've mentioned, the denial of, the basic conditions of life through the complete siege, the indiscriminate bombing. They also have 6 pages of comments from Israeli politicians and military leaders, including Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you find any of those claims to have merit? And would you uphold a finding of guilt were it to be issued and you were president?
Okay, as I said earlier, if evidence indicates that Benjamin Netanyahu initiated this knowing about the loss of indiscriminate loss of life, that is one thing. But is Israel committed to genocide? No, they're not. And any contention like that, I think, is really appalling, because no, Israel is not committed to eliminating the Palestinian people or Muslim people. No, they're not. Now, Hamas is committed to eliminating Jewish people. That's true. I don't know how else to portray it. No, I don't think this is a genocide. I think it is a poorly executed plan. I think it is resulting in horrifying indiscriminate loss of life that must be stopped, never to happen again. And those who've been perpetuating it should be held accountable based on the law, period.
We can move on. We can move on.
That means Hamas and Israel. And all I'm looking for is this. I just want to make this case. I know I don't look like someone whose community is really suffering too right now. I know I don't look like someone who, needs any help or support or is facing any kind of threat whatsoever. I just look like a white, privileged man. I know that. But I would just ask that both of you and people watching have some empathy for a group of people right now around the world who have been suffering for generations, who are scared out of their wits right now for their children too, and who have great empathy for Palestinian people like me. And I just wish progressives can unite around something much more important than which side you're on, which is the side of humanity. And I understand the appalling nature of this whole thing. I would just ask that you understand how the ignorance of how another people are suffering who look like me, that don't look like we need any help, is actually a really big issue. And I would just ask you to think about that.
Suffering doesn't justify atrocity.
Yeah, and let's be clear, North Gaza has been wiped off the map, Congressman. North Gaza is gone.
Anti-Semitism that is resulting from the anti-Semitism that is resulting from this.
Anti-Semitism is real. It's a real issue. Anti-Semitism stemming from this war is a real issue too. I've seen it both on social media. We've seen hate crimes increase. It's real. I don't think that was the time. I don't think that was the place. And I don't think it should have been in response to a South African ICJ filing of genocide.
Is really dangerous and really horrifying for people. And I can tell you don't totally understand that. I'm not asking.
Look, I understand it. These are real issues. They need to be talked about. But I just don't. It's a weird placement of that. I don't look like someone who's struggling right now. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not being empathetic enough. But again, real issue, just didn't feel like it was the right place to drop that.
To do anything else other than to listen to what I just said and understand that there are a lot of people suffering. And no, it's not the same thing. No more than the Jews that were brutalized and killed and raped by Hamas fighters, any more than the indiscriminate loss of life in Gaza. They're both horrifying, and it has to end. But please understand the fear.
You know, I'm thinking about it. It's like, I'm like, well, where is the right place to bring it up? I don't know when exactly the right place to bring it up. It just was weird placement. It didn't have a natural transition, I think.
In other communities that don't maybe seem like it's existing. And that's how a lot of Jewish people are feeling right now. And I'm afraid without a little bit of that empathy, you're going to see a flight of Jewish progressives from the Democratic Party that's going to make solving these problems even more difficult. I'm just asking for some
let me
empathy.
interject.
That's all.
Let me interject. My primary concern at the moment is what I view as an ongoing genocide in Gaza. Okay. So we have, I'm just going to give you the numbers here. This is from Euromed Monitor, the human rights group. We have 30,676 Palestinians who have been killed. 12,040 of them are children. 6,103 of them.
I'm sorry. Can we take a pause right now? I feel like I'm going to demod someone in live time right now in the Discord. Oh, no. What am I looking at here? Oh, I don't want to engage in Discord drama right now. Maybe I should wait till after. But I'm looking at these messages and I'm not happy about what's going on in the Israel-Palestine chat right now. Uh-oh. Let me finish this and we'll check it out.
Them are women. Of the 30,676 Palestinians killed, 28,201 of them are civilians. We have 58,960 people injured. There's been 105 journalists who've been killed. Many of them, there's tremendous evidence that they've been targeted on purpose.
115, I thought, but okay. Maybe it's 105. I don't know. I think it might be there's a gap between this interview and today.
Of the 2.3 million residents of Gaza, 1.935 million of them are displaced. There's 67,946 homes that have been completely destroyed. We have 201 mosques that have been bombed, 3 churches that have been bombed, 169 healthcare facilities that have been bombed, 198 heritage sites that have been bombed. What we're looking at here, I think it's a genocide. I think South Africa is right. Clearly you disagree with that, but the crocodile tears I find a little insulting. This idea that we should care more about feelings of some people as a whole group of people is getting wiped off the map. North Gaza is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It's rubble. And Ben Gvir and Smotrich have announced a plan of ethnic cleansing. Why should that not be the main focus and the main concern, especially when it's my money and our weapons that are being used for it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know what, Kyle, first of all, accuse me of having crocodile tears. Come on. Come on. Have you not heard me say 1,000 times on this interview so far that I have great empathy and I feel the same way about the loss of innocent human life? And I can't hear, I've not heard you say one thing empathetic. I've not heard you say one thing empathetic towards a country and people that have been persecuted, oppressed, and killed in mass for generations. The only reason my family's an American family, Kyle, is because they escaped pogroms in Europe. Israel is also trying to protect itself. You never talk about it.
Because I don't think they're trying to protect themselves. I think they're trying to wipe out Palestinians. That's what the evidence suggests.
Well, I think, okay, then look I'm trying to be empathetic. You don't have empathy for the Jewish people, it appears, or for the Israeli state, and I understand
that's such a cheap trick. You're basically saying I'm an anti-Semite because I'm critical of what's happening in Gaza.
I'm not.
Do you think I'm an anti-Semite, Congressman?
I didn't. Kyle, I did not use that term. What I'm saying is I'm empathizing.
You're very clearly implying it.
You're saying I have crocodile tears. I'm trying to tell you that right now it is a disaster in the Middle East. Both people have been suffering for generations, and what I'm seeing in Gaza is appalling, period. It's disgusting. If I were president, I would handle this quite differently. I would not allow tens of thousands of people to be killed, and frankly, I would not have allowed Israelis to be suffering like they have for generations. And I know none of us were alive during the Holocaust, but my goodness, you have no empathy for what it is like to be a Jewish person. None. And I'm telling you,
I would be the first one on the front lines trying to protect Jews during the Holocaust, and that's how I feel like I am right now.
I'm sorry. I just couldn't. I'm sorry. That overtook me. Oh, God. Oh, my God, that hurt. Oh, it felt like my skin turned inside out. Holy shit. I'd be in the first line. I would have jumped in front of the trains. Oh, God. I'm sorry. It's like, I believe Kyle is genuine in his belief that during the Holocaust, he would have been in the front lines, right? I'm just, I guess me, I just like to, it's hard for me to imagine at that time, during that type of programming, during that type of socialization, if I would have had the courage to do that. I'd like to think I would. But it's just in my mind, just Kyle, like, if I was at the Holocaust, I would have jumped in front of the trains. Like, okay. I mean, good. Look, Holocaust is bad. I don't know whether oh, my skin. Ugh.
Trying to protect the Palestinians during the atrocity against them.
You talk about that.
That's my position.
At all.
Congressman,
I don't hear you talk about that history at all.
Do you think it's understandable? Do you think
I don't live in 1940?
Do you think it's
live right now.
understandable to prioritize an ongoing genocide? Do you think it's understandable? Do you think it requires you to be an anti-Semite?
This would be an interesting question. What is Kyle and Krystal's definition of genocide? I wonder.
To say that the most important foreign policy issue in the world right now is the ongoing starvation and genocide of an entire people. And
okay, I didn't know that was the. I mean, everybody has their own foreign policy priorities.
Planned ethnic cleansing.
It's not. No, the ethnic cleansing and the genocide was against Jewish people during the Holocaust in the 1940s. That is true.
That's not a good response from Dean. Dean would have to, if he wanted to say, he'd be like, his point should be, we don't have any evidence that the Israeli government has set out to permanently expel the Gaza population. They have so far, as from all government statements, from the people who are in positions of power to make these decisions, and that's what he would have to say, because we've had many Israeli politicians say some super yikesy stuff that are associated with the government, or are cabinet officials, like when the agriculture minister said the new Gaza, or those think tanks that have proposed some pretty horrific stuff. That would be the defense, is that we don't know that they're going to engage in that type of expulsion and physical elimination of the people. We don't know that. That would be Dean's defense. But Dean's defense instead, it was the Jews that went through that. Both the Jews and Palestinians could both go through genocide.
Israel is not committing a genocide trying to eliminate an entire people.
All right, let me ask you.
They're trying to eliminate a terrorist organization that just killed 1,200 people in the most brutal fashion
imaginable. They're very bad at it.
I think it's
sickening. They actually have increased support for Hamas, and they have massacred vastly more civilians than they have, even by their own estimates, of Hamas fighters. But I want to ask one more question on this.
I think this all ends up. I have empathy for I have empathy for both peoples, and it appears that right now all you want to talk about is empathy for one, and I understand that's your position.
And what's getting bombed?
One that's being massacred by the thousands on a daily basis. Okay,
what about
last question.
What about the 1,000 Israelis that were brutally attacked?
We covered October 7th 1,000 times.
We covered it extensively. Congressman, who is being killed right now?
Well, I mean, to be fair, it's been like, I mean, I don't want to. There's been like 3 months of things that have happened between now and October 7th. There's like a lot of other news and stories to talk about. Like, for example, if I was to bring somebody on to talk about the war in Ukraine, would it be weird if I didn't bring up Bucha in the conversation? Like, yeah, it was a horrific thing that happened, but that was at one. There's a lot of other news and events that happened throughout this war as well. I mean, plus Dina's brought it up multiple times, so he has been able to discuss it openly on the program. I think a good question, whatever. You know what? Let's just get through. There's only 2 minutes left.
Right now, whose government is complicit in those killings right now? Okay, I can't call my local Hamas representative and tell him to cut it out. But
my card's with the PFLP. I'm with Bad Bunny.
I can talk to my member of Congress. I can talk to people who are running for president like you and the president of the United States who are sending our tax dollars to bomb babies. So the last question I have for you, and then we can move on potentially, is do you take Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and Netanyahu at their word that their goal, their end goal of this operation is to, quote, thin out the population of Gaza, to push a, quote, voluntary migration, which of course is not voluntary when your house has been bombed and your children are being starved. This was just in Haaretz, I believe, yesterday. Netanyahu considering scenario of surrender and deportation of Gaza residents. They're talking to countries as far afield as Congo to try to get them to accept the Palestinian refugees who are being pushed out of their homes. Do you accept their words that their end goal here is a complete ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip of Palestinians.
See, the easy thing for Dean to say here, right, and I'm just saying this from his perspective, would be, you just said that, number one, that's not their goal. They said that it's something that's being considered. What does considered mean? That could mean the plan put in front of him. He thought about it for a little bit and then threw it out. He read it, said, this is stupid, threw it away. Like, the fact that he would even have that plan be put in front of him in and of itself is a horrific story. But that would be what, if Dean Sharp here, that would be something, if he wanted to, you know, come out for Israel again, he could say. But I mean, it's an extreme concern. If I was a presidential candidate, I would say that any scenario where Israel attempts to engage in that behavior should be the end of any and all American assistance to Israel in any form, financial, military, etc. And that's when you start talking about real political repercussions to Israel, where we're not even talking about ceasing aid to Israel. We're talking about fundamentally transforming and moving away from Israel. If that is what I believe an American politician should say if they're running for president, if that was legitimately being considered, because that type of attention from an American president on an issue like that would certainly put pressure on the Israeli government and the Israeli public, that they could lose one of their most valuable allies. And plus, with the Netanyahu government not that popular right now, that type of pressure could be real. I mean, and plus, if the Israeli government doesn't engage in the behavior, which would be a very easy thing to not engage in ethnic cleansing, if they were to engage in that type of behavior, I mean, we shouldn't assist them like, if they were to do that, co-signing that with American military weapons would be probably one of the most disgusting things the American government has done since the end of the Cold War.
I don't know what to make of their words. I will tell you this,
like,
Krystal,
that in and of itself should act as enough leverage to dissuade any action like that.
You just referenced, I think, are bad people.
Not from Dean Phillips. The Israelis don't care about Dean Phillips, but from, like, you know, Biden or someone.
Period. I'm going to leave it at that. Period. And they're a big part of the problem.
That would be political suicide. If someone said, if the Israeli government was to permanently expel the Palestinian population, that will be the end of America's military and financial and any aid to Israel. I don't think that would necessarily be political suicide. Most Americans want to end the war as soon as possible. Joe Biden's political base is, when it comes to Democrats broadly, are more supportive of Palestine than they used to be. And it wouldn't be, I'm abandoning Israel. It would be, if Israel was to go on a path, that would be one of the most horrific paths it could go down. We will not assist them and we will not be associated with said action. I don't think that is necessarily, it was like, oh my God, a horrific anti-Semitic statement from Joe Biden. I honestly don't think it would have that much of a negative impact. But, I mean, the Biden administration might not think it's necessary, depending on their internal conversations with the Netanyahu government, but who knows?
For Israel and Israel's security and Israel's future, and I hope Israelis replace them because it is the only democratic nation in the entire region. Thank goodness Israelis will have that chance to do so, and hopefully soon, period. And they should be held accountable, as I said earlier, period.
Guys, if you like what you see, sign up.
Okay, that was enough of that, man. 30-minute back and forth over Israel-Palestine. My God. Krystal and Kyle.